What if the leader of an oil-rich nation was accused of running the very drug trafficking network responsible for flooding another country with cocaine? What if that accusation became the justification for an international arrest, military pressure, and historic indictment? This is the story of Venezuela's so-called Cartel of the Suns, a story of drugs, politics, power, and the law. To understand this story, we have to start with Nicolas Maduro Moros, once a bus driver, then union leader, later a foreign minister, and finally president of Venezuela. Under his rule, Venezuela has seen economic collapse, political upheaval, and intense international scrutiny. But beyond oil and politics, there's another claim, a far more sinister one, that Maduro and his inner circle orchestrated one of the hemisphere's most prolific narcotics trafficking networks. The phrase Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, didn't originate in Washington's legal files. It was coined much earlier by Venezuelan journalists in the 1990s, referencing the sun insignia on the uniforms of high-ranking Venezuelan military officials. Think of it not as a classic cartel like Mexico's Sinaloa or Jalisco Nueva Generation, but rather a metaphor for corruption military elites accused of enriching themselves through drug money. Backhand index pointing right, the term stuck. As allegations of corruption and narco ties grew, it became shorthand in media, in politics, and eventually in U.S. legal rhetoric. In March 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed a sweeping indictment against Nicolas Maduro and 14 co-conspirators, alleging involvement in narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, corruption, and weapons charges. According to U.S. prosecutors, the defendants betrayed the Venezuelan people and corrupted Venezuelan institutions to line their pockets with drug money. They allegedly named their operation the Cartel of the Suns, a nod to those sun insignias worn by military officers. The indictment accuses Maduro and his allies of protecting cocaine manufacturing facilities, authorizing transport, and facilitating drug routes from Venezuela to the United States and Europe. In 2025, the U.S. government took a dramatic step. It designated the Cartel of the Suns as both a specially designated global terrorist organization and later a foreign terrorist organization, FTO, placing it in the same category as groups the U.S. usually fights on battlefields, not courtrooms. This was a seismic policy move, framing drug trafficking not just as crime, but as an act of terrorism. Backhand index pointing right, the justification? According to U.S. officials, the network was allegedly moving hundreds of tons of cocaine annually into the U.S. It reportedly cooperated with groups like FARC, Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Pressure didn't stop at sanctions and court indictments. The U.S. launched Operation Southern Spear, a multifaceted campaign combining naval interdiction, intelligence action, and strikes against alleged narco-trafficking vessels. By late 2025 and early 2026, U.S. forces conducted operations in Venezuelan waters and even landed strikes within Venezuelan territory, actions the U.S. described as part of the broader narcotics crackdown. In an unprecedented development, former President Maduro was captured by U.S. forces in Caracas in January 2026 and flown to the United States to face trial on narcotics and narco-terrorism charges. But this story is not without its critics and complexities. Exclamation mark 1. Did the cartel really exist? In early 2026, U.S. prosecutors quietly removed the explicit claim that Maduro was the leader of an actual organization called the Cartel of the Suns. Instead, they described the alleged network more as a patronage system, a culture of corruption where elites enrich themselves through trafficking. Legal analysts noted this might reflect reality, that the Cartel of the Suns isn't a structured cartel like others, but a catch-all term used in political and media narratives. Exclamation mark 2. Venezuela's government pushback. The Maduro regime and its supporters rejects the entire cartel narrative. They argue the U.S. is using drug accusations to justify political interference and attempts to change Venezuela's government. In fact, Venezuela accused neighbors like Ecuador of being the real hubs of cocaine exports, pointing fingers at other governments instead. This isn't just a narcotics case. It's a geopolitical earthquake. Backhand index pointing right, the U.S. says drugs are a national security threat, tying cocaine flows to fentanyl deaths and law enforcement crises. Backhand index pointing right, critics say the strategy is also about oil, influence, and regime change, especially as Venezuela controls vast crude reserves. and Latin American leaders are divided. Some nations echoed the U.S. designation, while others questioned it and asked for real evidence. Maduro, now in U.S. custody, faces a complex legal battle. Charges span narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons conspiracies. His defense rejects guilt, claims political persecution, and insists there's no evidence he ever led a cartel. Many international legal experts have questioned both the evidence and the broader intervention. So why does this story matter? Right arrow because it blurs the lines between crime, state power, and international politics. Right arrow because it shows how allegations of drug trafficking can reshape global relationships. Right arrow and because it asks a deeper question. Can a government, even a corrupt one, be equated with a drug cartel? This case will likely define how nations pursue narcocrime in the 21st century, and whether criminal justice can ever be separated from political interest. If you found this deep dive insightful, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. What side of this story do you believe? Is it a justified crime fight or political overreach? Stay tuned for more global investigative stories.